The West is well known for having many cool and eerie ghost towns to explore. Hi, we're Matt and Cheryl, and over our years of traveling together, we've visited several fascinating ghost towns in the mountains and deserts of the West. So in this video, we'll share with you 10 of our favorites. Let's kick it off by going to the mountains of Montana to a place called Garnet Ghost Town. We visited this with my parents about 10 years ago, and it was really an amazing town. It gets its name from Garnet Mountain, which it's located on, and which in turn gets its name for the garnet stone that is found here. Like most ghost towns, it was the discovery of gold that built the town. The mine's productivity was okay, but the town's location high on the mountain made it difficult to transport the gold, so people left. But they kept coming back every few decades to try to get something out of it. That makes this one of the longer lasting ghost towns. It ended shortly after World War II, which is one reason why it's so well preserved. Thankfully, it's taken care of by the Garnet Preservation Association. Ghost towns were usually thrown up haphazardly, and I've seen some that have crumbled only recently, so we need preservation societies to protect these historic sites if we want to enjoy them much longer.
Our next ghost town is found on one of the most scenic drives in Colorado, Independence Pass. We were on our way to Aspen and checking out some of the mountains and some of the cool tundra flowers when we saw this cute little town on the side of the road. I couldn't believe how deserted it was, not touristy at all. The structures are nothing to write home about, mostly some boarded up wood buildings with a few plaques to read, but the coolest thing is just the amazing views of the mountains and the crazy history of this town. Back in 1849 on July 4th, gold was found in this area and the cute residents who lived here named the town Independence. However, like most of the mining towns in the West, they eventually went bust. One winter, a huge snowstorm came along, trapping the remaining 100 people that lived here. So what did they do? They tore the siding off their houses, made them into skis, and skied through the valley down to Aspen, never to return again.
Up next is the very strange town of Cisco, Utah. Originally, it served as a watering stop for steam engines on the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. The town quickly grew, attracting workers and their families, and it developed a community complete with homes, stores, and saloons. The decline of Cisco began with the advent of diesel locomotives, which reduced the need for watering stops and led to a decrease in jobs. Then the construction of Interstate 70 during the 1960s diverted much of the traffic away from the town, and Cisco faded into obscurity. In fact, Johnny Cash wrote a song about the town being bypassed by the interstate called Cisco Clifton's Fillin' Station. The character and his gas station is fictional, but the concept is there. A small town that was once a hub of activity, brought down by the changing times. Well, the town fell into disrepair and is truly a disaster today. Most of the buildings are collapsed or hollowed out at best. But then the strangest thing happened. A young woman from Chicago came to Moab to visit and was mesmerized by the landscape. As she was leaving town, she saw Cisco and couldn't get it out of her mind. So she looked into it and found out someone owned the entire town and was willing to sell it. She purchased Cisco, Utah, renovated one of the buildings, and moved in. So technically, it's no longer a ghost town. Population, 1. Interestingly, she invites artists to come and live in her town each year, where they get to practice their art on the buildings in her town. If you drive by, you'll see some creations like the bus with a giant snake sticking out of it. Up next is Grafton, located in southern Utah. When most people think of ghost towns, they have something to do with mining or the railroads. But Grafton was a farming community just trying to survive in the harsh desert. It's located on the banks of the Virgin River, which flows out of nearby Zion National Park. The Virgin gave them water to survive in the dry desert. However, it's prone to flash flooding, something that happens several times a year and has even claimed several lives in Zion National Park. These floods caused havoc for the small town of Grafton, destroying its crops often. Finally, the settlers just gave up and left. They left behind a gorgeous church, a few other buildings, and a graveyard. Thankfully, a historical society has stepped in to preserve the remaining buildings. We visited this a few times, and with Zion's gorgeous peaks in the background, this might be the most picturesque ghost town on this list. It was pretty enough for Hollywood. The first outdoor movie was filmed here, and later, Paul Newman famously rode around here with Catherine Ross in the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's one of my favorite movies filmed in one of my favorite ghost towns. Okay, let's stick with another non-mining ghost town. Up next is the gorgeous ghost town of Chesterfield, Idaho. This is really one of the most unique ghost towns I've ever visited. Located on the Oregon Trail, it was settled by pioneers of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who were notorious planners. So this is an orderly community. not a collection of shacks haphazardly thrown together like most ghost towns. It was not a mining or railroad community, but a farming and agricultural community. And it wasn't built in the desert like many others that struggled to survive. It's located in a gorgeous green valley in southern Idaho, near today's resort town of Lava Hot Springs. The architectural styles are also different, consisting of many brick homes, an unusual occurrence in most western ghost towns. After the town got bypassed by the railroad, it struggled economically until it was deserted in the 1930s. It's preserved by the Chesterfield Foundation, who opens up the homes to tours every spring. If you ever end up driving to Jackson Hole from Salt Lake, this is a nice little detour. Let's stay in the great state of Idaho for our next one, which is Bayhorse Ghost Town. Bayhorse was founded on silver mining. Legend says a lone prospector went looking for his bay-colored horse that had wandered off from his camp, and that's when he discovered silver and then their hills. So he named the town Bayhorse. At its peak, it had a few hundred residents and several saloons and businesses. Over $10 million worth of silver was extracted from this mine. It followed the boom and bust life of most mining towns. When the mines ran out, so did the residents. What makes this fairly unique is that it's protected as a state park, so it's beautifully preserved and offers several educational displays. The ghost town is fantastic, but what made this so enjoyable for us was the recreation in the surrounding area. We came here to watch the solar eclipse, and we camped out for several days. We did some four-wheeling in the mountains, as well as playing at the lake. We haven't covered Idaho much on our channel yet, but we definitely will.
Our next ghost town is in Montana, just an hour away from Yellowstone National Park. We visit Yellowstone every single year and we're always trying to do something new. But back in 2022, we decided to go to Virginia City, Montana, and I'm telling you, I'm kind of ticked that we just barely figured out to visit this place. It's a very authentic mining town, and what I love about it is that there are boardwalks along both sides of the road, and you can peek into several of the little stores, and they're recreations of what buildings would have been like back in the day. You can peek in a blacksmith shop, a dress shop. There's even a super cool Cousins candy store where you can actually go buy old-timey candy. Our kids loved it. But one of our very best finds was when we found an old opera house that is still putting on vaudeville shows and melodramas. They've been doing it the past 75 years. That day we were so lucky because they had tickets available and we were able to go watch a vaudeville show. If you haven't ever seen one of those, you really need to try to see one. They're hilarious with all those cute little skits. This town was terrorized by the road agents who used to really harass the miners, and they would steal their gold. But these guys were finally brought to justice, and you can see their graves in the cemetery up on Boot Hill. The best restaurant in town is the Road Agents Roost, and they actually serve Polish and German food. We loved our pierogies. Just 5 minutes down the street is another famous ghost town called Nevada City, which is so big it's actually a state park. We weren't able to go on this trip, but we could see it would be really cool.
Up next is the very historically important South Pass City in Wyoming. The valley or region known as South Pass was the main corridor for the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails. After South Pass, pioneers might go to one of those three places and follow any number of shortcuts, but South Pass was the bottleneck they all passed through. Near the end of the Oregon Trail era, gold was discovered here, and because it got so much traffic, it attracted over 3,000 residents. The town revolved around the nearby Carissa mine. It didn't last long though. The mine wasn't all that productive, and within 5 years, the town dwindled to about 100 people. Eventually, it turned into a ghost town. But in the 1960s, the state of Wyoming purchased the town in hopes of turning it into a tourist attraction. This place is way out in the middle of nowhere, so there are now a few residents who live next to the historic site who take care of the town. We happened to visit before it was open one day, so we wandered around all by ourselves. The buildings are wonderfully preserved, and the little valley is so remote and pretty. I really enjoyed it, but I wish I could have talked to some guides or been around when they had some activities happening.
Our last and most amazing ghost town is located in Utah, and maybe one of my favorite places on the planet, which is Capitol Reef National Park. In addition to the cool things you can expect to see in a national park, like great views and hikes, Capitol Reef contains a ghost town that has orchards and horses, a blacksmith shop, an old schoolhouse, and even some old homes. Back in the 1880s, pioneers who were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints settled into this valley, where they planted fruit trees and used water from the Fremont River to sustain themselves. One of my very favorite stops is to go to the Gifford House. This has been a home of several families that used to live in Fruita, but now the national park owns it, and they serve fruit pies, and they are amazing. We usually get in line first thing in the morning and get a pie and a cinnamon roll, or both, for breakfast. We usually have a best pie contest, and spoiler alert, the mixed berry always wins, with the peach being a close second. Other things we love to see in Fruita are the Pendleton Barn. You just feel like you've been in a time machine and went back in time. I also love the real life horses living there. It is so cool. The other thing I like is when you go around and look at these old buildings, there's actually little speakers, not people, but tiny speakers where you can push a button, and there's actual people that used to live in the town telling stories. My very favorite is the teacher talking about her rowdy class at the schoolhouse. One last little thing that is so special about Fruita to me is that the orchards, there are still 1,900 fruit trees in the orchard, and if you go there during fruit season, you can pay to pick the fruit in the park. It is just a blast from the past and such an amazing national park and ghost town experience.
Now let's go back to Wyoming. This is Old Trail Town, located in Cody, Wyoming. This isn't technically a ghost town. Old Trail Town was established in 1967 by historian Bob Edgar, who sought to preserve the history and spirit of the Old West. It's a collection of buildings that he purchased from various places around the West and then moved to Cody to be preserved. He collected over 25 buildings. The site includes a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and a general store, all dating from the late 1800s and early 1900s. It even has Butch Cassidy's cabin from his Wyoming hideout. These structures were carefully dismantled, transported, and reassembled at Old Trail Town. Inside the buildings, we can find a collection of Western artifacts, including antique vehicles, tools, and household items. It also has a grave site where a few famous Western characters are buried, including Jeremiah Liver-Eating Johnson, who was played by Robert Redford in the movies. Old Trail Town is just one of several cool things to see and do in Cody, Wyoming, which sits just outside of Yellowstone National Park. And if you want to see more of Cody, click here. And if you want to see the 10 best national park lodges, click here. Thank you for watching.